January 17, 1920. A frigid wind howls off Lake Michigan, rattling the window panes of Chicago's saloons. Inside, the mood is grim. Bartenders pour the last legal whiskeys, patrons toast the end of an era, and clocks tick toward midnight, the moment the Volstead Act will choke the life out of every bar, brewery, and distillery in America. The city holds its breath, waiting for the silence, for the law to descend. But in the shadows, a different kind of anticipation crackles in the air. For men like Johnny Torrio, this is not an ending. It is a coronation. From a smoke-filled back room at Colosimo's Cafe on South Wabash Avenue, Torrio watches the city's official sobriety begin. He is a quiet, meticulous man, more businessman than thug, and he sees what the lawmakers in Washington do not. They have not banned alcohol. They have handed him the keys to an empire. The demand will not vanish. It will simply go underground, where it will be unregulated, untaxed, and infinitely more profitable. He has already laid the groundwork, securing breweries in the suburbs and arranging for shipments from Canada. His only problem is finding the right kind of men to manage the storm that is coming. Men with nerve, ambition, and a particular talent for violence. 200 miles away, in a dimly lit office in Brooklyn, a 21-year-old enforcer named Alphonse Capone takes a phone call. He is broad-shouldered and quick-witted, with a jagged scar on his left cheek that earned him the name Scarface, a moniker he despises. He is working for the gangster Frankie Yale, but he is restless. The old neighborhood rackets feel small, provincial. The call is from Torrio, his old mentor. The message is simple: come to Chicago. The opportunity is immense. When Capone arrives, the city is a paradox. On the surface, it is a city of law, patrolled by uniformed officers of the Chicago Police Department. But beneath that veneer, it is a sprawling, chaotic marketplace of vice. Torrio's headquarters is a 4-story building at 2222 South Wabash known as the Four Deuces. The first floor is a speakeasy, the second a gambling den, the third and fourth a brothel. It is here that Capone begins his education. He's not just a bouncer anymore. He's a manager, a strategist, an apprentice to the king. You are standing with him on the first floor, the air thick with the smell of sweat, cheap perfume, and illicit beer trucked in from Torrio's suburban breweries. You watch as Capone observes everything. He sees how the patrolmen on the beat enter through the back door, not to make an arrest, but to collect their weekly envelope containing $20, sometimes $50. He learns the names of the district captains, who receive hundreds, and the ward politicians, who command thousands for their guarantee of selective blindness. He sees that the law is not an obstacle. It is a commodity, something to be bought and sold just like the barrels of beer in the basement. Torrio's plan is elegant. He wants to create a syndicate, an organized confederation of the city's gangs, each controlling their own territory. They would cooperate on supply and split the profits, minimizing bloodshed and maximizing revenue. He negotiates with the Irish North Side Gang, led by the flamboyant florist Dean O'Banion, and the Jenna brothers, who control Little Italy. For a time, it works. The money flows in at a staggering rate. The Chicago outfit, as Torrio's operation is known, brings in an estimated $100,000 a week from beer and liquor sales alone. But Capone sees the flaw in Torrio's vision. He sees the ambition and greed in the eyes of their rivals. O'Banion, in particular, mocks Torrio's attempts at diplomacy. Capone argues for a more direct approach. He believes that power does not come from negotiation. It comes from the barrel of a Thompson submachine gun. He sees a city not to be shared, but to be conquered. The old world of organized crime, with its neighborhood codes and unwritten rules, is dying. A new, more brutal and corporate form of criminality is being born, and Alphonse Capone, the boy from Brooklyn, intends to be its chief executive. He stands at the heart of the Four Deuces, a nexus of cash, corruption, and contraband, and understands that he has not just come to Chicago to work for a king. He has come to take his throne. The fragile peace Johnny Torrio had so carefully engineered begins to fray in the autumn of 1924. The source of the friction is the man with the fragrant storefront and the iron fist, Charles Dion O'Banion. From his flower shop, Schofield's, directly across from Holy Name Cathedral on North State Street, O'Banion runs the North Side Gang, with a blend of Irish charm and chilling brutality. He despises the Italians, viewing Torrio and Capone as upstarts encroaching on his birthright. The agreement to divide the city's rackets feels less like a partnership and more like a surrender, and O'Banion pushes at its boundaries, hijacking the Jenner brothers' whiskey trucks and openly mocking Torrio's authority. Capone sees the danger. He warns Torrio that O'Banion is a snake in a garden of lilies, that his diplomacy is a mask for treachery. The proof comes in May. O'Banion, facing a potential jail sentence, approaches Torrio with a proposition. He wants to sell his share in the Sebin Brewery, a massive operation, for $500,000 and retire to Colorado. He tells Torrio a huge shipment of beer is ready to move. Torrio agrees, meeting O'Banion at the brewery on the night of the transaction. But as the first trucks roll out, the warehouse is flooded with the blinding headlights of police cars. It is a raid. Torrio is arrested, facing a serious federal charge. O'Banion had arranged the entire thing, knowing the police were on their way. He had not only sold Torrio a business that was about to be seized, but had also set him up for prison. From his cell, Torrio's composure finally cracks. The betrayal is too blatant, the disrespect too profound. He has lost face, money, and nearly his freedom. He gives the order Capone has been waiting for. O'Banion must be eliminated. November 10th, 1924. The bell above the door of Schofield's chimes softly. Dean O'Banion is in the back room, clipping chrysanthemum stems, a pair of shears in his hand. 3 men enter the shop. One is Frankie Yale, brought in from New York as a sign of respect and finality. With him are John Scalise and Albert Anselmi, 2 Sicilian gunmen known for their quiet efficiency. O'Banion recognizes Yale and smiles, stepping forward to greet him, wiping his hands on his apron. He extends his right hand. Yale grasps it firmly, his grip a vice. As their hands meet, Scalise and Anselmi step forward, their overcoats parting just enough to reveal the .38 caliber revolvers in their fists. They fire 6 shots. 2 find O'Banion's chest. 1 tears through his neck. As he falls backward among the scattered petals and ferns, one of the gunmen leans over him and fires a final, ceremonial shot into his head. The 3 men walk out, leaving the scent of cordite to mingle with the sweetness of the roses. O'Banion's funeral is the most extravagant gangland spectacle Chicago has ever witnessed. His silver and bronze casket is said to have cost $10,000. 26 truckloads of flowers follow the hearse, including a massive wreath from Torrio and Capone with a ribbon that reads, "From your pals." They stand near the grave, faces impassive as their rival is lowered into the frozen earth. But they have not ended a war. They have merely fired its opening salvo. The North Side Gang, now under the command of the vengeful and methodical Earl Jaime Weiss, unleashes a campaign of terror against the outfit. For months, the streets are a battleground. Then, on the afternoon of January 24th, 1925, the war comes for the king himself. Johnny Torrio and his wife, Anna, are returning from a shopping trip. As their chauffeured limousine pulls up to their apartment building at 7106 South Clyde Avenue, a blue Cadillac speeds toward them. Weiss and George, Bugs Moran leap out, shotguns roaring, the car's windows shatter, the chauffeur is hit. Torrio throws himself out of the door, but he is too slow. Buckshot rips into his jaw, his chest, his groin. He collapses on the pavement as Moran stands over him, leveling a pistol for the final shot. The firing pin clicks on an empty chamber. The assassins speed away, leaving Torrio bleeding in his wife's arms. He survives, but in his hospital bed, swathed in bandages, the fight has gone out of him. He has built an empire on order and control, and now his world is nothing but chaos and blood. He summons Capone. He tells his protege that it is all his now. The breweries, the brothels, the gambling dens, the politicians, the police, the entire empire, worth an estimated $50 million a year. At the age of 26, Alphonse Capone is the new, undisputed ruler of Chicago's underworld. Johnny Torrio, the old fox, takes his $3 million fortune and retires, leaving the young wolf to the war he always wanted. With Torrio gone, Capone reshapes the outfit in his own image. Where Torrio was discreet, Capone is flamboyant. He moves his headquarters from the grimy south side to the heart of the city, taking over a 5-room suite on the 4th and 5th floors of the Lexington Hotel at Michigan Avenue and 22nd Street. It becomes his fortress and his court. You can see him there, holding court like a modern Caesar, surrounded by a legion of bodyguards led by the loyal Frank Nitti. His personal suite, room 530, is lined with bulletproof shutters. He conducts business from behind a massive, ornate desk, dressed in custom silk suits, a 7-carat diamond pinky ring flashing on his hand. He is no longer just a gangster. He is a public figure, a celebrity criminal who gives interviews to the press, donates to charity, and insists he is merely a businessman providing a public service. But beneath the veneer of civic-minded enterprise, the war for Chicago rages on. Jaime Weiss, now leading the North Side Gang, is a fanatic driven by a cold, personal hatred for Capone. He sees himself as an avenging angel for the murdered Dean O'Banion, and he will stop at nothing to see Capone dead. The battleground shifts to Cicero, the industrial suburb west of Chicago that Capone has converted into his personal fiefdom. He controls the mayor, the police chief, and every illegal saloon and gambling parlor. It is here, in his own stronghold, that Weiss decides to make his most audacious move. September 20th, 1926. It is just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Capone is eating lunch at the Hawthorne Inn, his Cicero headquarters. The street outside is quiet. Suddenly, a procession of cars, at least 8 of them, turns onto the street, moving in a tight, military-style formation. They slow as they pass the hotel restaurant. You are inside as the windows explode inward. A storm of lead rips through the room, fired from a dozen Thompson submachine guns. Waiters and patrons scream and dive for cover. Capone's bodyguard, Frankie Rio, throws himself onto Capone, pushing him to the floor as bullets shred the walls, shatter mirrors, and splinter the wooden bar. For nearly a minute, the gunfire is continuous, a deafening roar. Over 1,000 rounds are fired into the building. Then, as quickly as it began, the motorcade speeds away. Capone rises, brushing plaster dust from his $20,000 suit. He is untouched, but profoundly shaken. No one has ever dared to challenge him with such overwhelming force in his own territory. He walks outside, surveying the pockmarked brickwork of his fortress. He knows who is responsible. The attack is a declaration that nowhere is safe, that Weiss will never stop. That night, Capone calls for a truce, a transparently false gesture. While his men meet with the Northsiders to discuss peace, Capone's assassins are already at work, planning a definitive end to the conflict. The trap is set for October 11th, 1926. Weiss's routine is well known. He spends his days at the headquarters he established for the upcoming election, an office on North State Street. Directly across the street is Schofield's, O'Banion's old flower shop, a place Weiss visits daily out of respect for his fallen mentor. Capone's men rent a 2nd-story room in a boarding house overlooking the intersection. For days, they wait. Just before 4 o'clock, Weiss arrives with his bodyguard, Sam Pella, his driver, and 2 other associates. They park and walk toward the shop. From the 2nd-story window across the street, 2 of Capone's gunmen, their identities forever shielded by the outfit's code of silence, take aim with their Thompson submachine guns. As Weiss and his men step onto the curb, the assassins open fire. The high-velocity 45 caliber rounds tear across the street. Weiss is hit first, spinning and collapsing against the stone wall of the Holy Name Cathedral. Bullets stitch across his body, 10 of them in total. His men fall around him. Within seconds, it is over. The gunmen disappear, leaving the smoking machine guns behind. When the police arrive, they find Jaime Weiss dead on the sidewalk, his pockets containing $3,200 in cash and a rosary. The war for the North Side is over. Alphonse Capone, at 27 years old, is the absolute, undisputed, and terrifying master of Chicago. With Jaime Weiss eliminated, a semblance of order descends upon Chicago's underworld. Capone's authority is absolute. His organization, now a sprawling corporate entity, is estimated to be grossing over $100 million a year, $60 million from alcohol, $25 million from gambling, and the rest from prostitution, dance halls, and various rackets. He controls the flow of Canadian whiskey across the border and operates a fleet of breweries working around the clock. His payroll includes not only his army of 700 soldiers, but also an estimated half of the Chicago Police Department and hundreds of city officials, from aldermen all the way up to the office of Mayor William Hale, Big Bill Thompson. Capone is more than a gangster. He is a parallel government, an invisible hand guiding the city's commerce and politics. But one pocket of resistance remains: the remnants of the North Side Gang, now led by George Bugs Moran. Moran is a hot-headed, reckless operator, more of a hijacker than a strategist. He lacks the cunning of O'Banion or the obsessive drive of Weiss, but he possesses a stubborn refusal to submit. From his headquarters at the SMC Cartage Company garage at 2122 North Clark Street, Moran continues to be a thorn in Capone's side, hijacking his whiskey shipments and disrupting his northern territory. The value of the stolen liquor is an annoyance, but Moran's defiance is an insult Capone cannot tolerate. By the winter of 1929, Capone decides that the North Side Gang must be eradicated completely, down to the last man. He retreats to his lavish estate in Palm Island, Florida, establishing a perfect alibi. The planning for the operation is left to one of his most trusted lieutenants, Machine Gun Jack McGurn. The plan is a masterpiece of deception, designed to exploit the gang's own routines and paranoia. McGurn's spies learn that a bootlegger, eager to get on Moran's good side, has offered him a shipment of high-quality old log cabin whiskey at a bargain price. The delivery is scheduled for 10:30 on the morning of February 14th, St. Valentine's Day, at the North Clark Street garage. The morning of Thursday, February 14th, 1929, dawns bitterly cold. A biting wind sweeps through Lincoln Park as Moran's men gather inside the unheated brick garage. 7 men are present: Pete and Frank Gusenberg, the gang's top enforcers; Adam Heyer, the bookkeeper; Albert Weinshank, who manages the cleaning and dyeing rackets; and 2 other associates, James Clark and John May. A 7th man, Reinhard Schwimmer, an optometrist who enjoys the thrill of associating with gangsters, is there just for the company. Bugs Moran himself is running late. At approximately 10:30, a stolen police Cadillac pulls up to the curb outside. 4 men get out. 2 are dressed in the dark blue uniforms of Chicago police officers. The other 2, in civilian overcoats, look like detectives escorting prisoners. Moran, approaching the garage on foot, sees the police car and assumes it is a routine shakedown. Not wanting to get caught in a raid, he ducks into a nearby coffee shop to wait it out. Inside the garage, his men see the uniforms and drop their weapons. Assuming the same thing, they are told to line up and face the wall, their hands held high. They comply without resistance. This is just another raid, another bribe to be paid. You are standing in the freezing garage, the smell of grease and stale beer hanging in the air. You see the 7 men lined up against the grimy brick wall, their backs to the door. The 2 men in civilian clothes, assassins from Capone's organization, step forward. They are carrying Thompson submachine guns. Without a word, they open fire. The sound is deafening inside the enclosed space. A relentless torrent of tight-shot .45 caliber rounds smashes into the 7 men, driving them into the wall and then to the concrete floor. The gunmen empty their 50-round drum magazines, reload, and fire again, methodically moving down the line, ensuring no one is left alive. One of them walks over to Frank Gusenberg, who is somehow still breathing, and delivers a final burst from a shotgun. The massacre lasts less than 2 minutes. The 2 costumed officers then lead the 2 plainclothes gunmen out with their hands up, a piece of theater for any witnesses on the street. It appears as if the police have the situation under control, arresting 2 suspects. The stolen police car drives away, disappearing into the city. Inside the garage, 70 machine gun slugs and 2 shotgun blasts have left a scene of unimaginable carnage. The St. Valentine's Day massacre will become the single most infamous gangland killing in American history, a brutal testament to the savagery of the beer wars and the terrifying reach of the man sunning himself 600 miles away in Florida, Al Capone. The first patrolmen to arrive at 2122 North Clark Street push open the garage door and freeze. The air is metallic with the smell of blood. 7 bodies lie twisted on the oil-stained concrete floor in a grotesque tableau of violence. The silence is broken only by the slow drip of water from a leaky pipe. Amid the carnage, 1 man, Frank Gusenberg, is still alive, despite having been hit 14 times. As he is lifted onto a stretcher, a police sergeant leans in close, asking the question the entire city will soon be screaming. "Who shot you?" Gusenberg, loyal to the gangster's code even in his final moments, whispers, "Nobody. Nobody shot me." He dies 3 hours later without saying another word. Within an hour, the street is a circus of flashing press cameras and shouting reporters. The gruesome photographs of the massacre are wired across the country, landing on the front page of every major newspaper. The public, which had often viewed Prohibition-era gangsters with a kind of romantic fascination, is horrified. This is not a back-alley shootout. It is a cold-blooded, systematic execution. The sheer brutality of the act galvanizes a new level of public outrage, and more importantly, it captures the attention of the White House. President Herbert Hoover, disgusted by the lawlessness that has made Chicago infamous, declares Al Capone public enemy number one and instructs his administration to bring him down by any means necessary. The problem is that the Chicago authorities are powerless. Capone's network of corruption runs so deep that no local witness will testify. No local jury will convict. The federal government, therefore, decides to launch a two-pronged assault. The first is a highly visible, brute force attack on Capone's operations, led by a 27-year-old Prohibition agent from the Department of Justice named Elliot Ness. Ness is given a hand-picked team of 11 young, fiercely dedicated agents, men he has vetted for their impeccable honesty. Their mission is simple: to wage total war on Capone's breweries and distilleries, to disrupt his supply chain and choke off his revenue. They smash through doors with sledgehammers, axe their way through vats of fermenting mash, and pour tens of thousands of gallons of illegal beer into the city's sewers. When Capone's men offer Ness a bribe of $2,000 a week, a fortune at the time, he contemptuously refuses. A newspaper reporter, hearing the story, dubs Ness and his team the Untouchables, and a legend is born. The second front in the government's war is quieter, more methodical, and infinitely more dangerous to Capone. While Ness is making headlines, a small, unassuming agent from the Treasury Department's Special Intelligence Unit is beginning an investigation that Capone does not even notice. His name is Frank J. Wilson, a stubborn, bespectacled accountant who cares nothing for raids or machine guns. Wilson is tasked with answering a simple question: how can a man who lives like a king, with multiple estates, custom cars, and $20,000 suits, have never filed a single income tax return? You are with Wilson in a small, dusty government office, buried under a mountain of seized ledgers, receipts, and bank statements. The task seems impossible. Capone deals exclusively in cash. His name is not on any deed, bank account, or bill of sale. He is a ghost in his own financial empire. For months, Wilson and his team painstakingly sift through the records of Capone's front businesses, tracing the flow of money through a labyrinth of bookies, bagmen, and shell corporations. They interview terrified clerks and intimidated accountants, applying relentless pressure. Capone sees Ness and his Untouchables as a public nuisance, a temporary disruption. He barely gives a thought to the quiet accountants from the Treasury Department. He fails to understand that while a gun can be silenced and a witness can be bought, the numbers on a ledger tell a story that cannot be intimidated. And Frank Wilson is beginning to learn how to read it. The noose is tightening, not with a rope, but with a simple adding machine tape. Frank Wilson's breakthrough comes not from the grand ledgers of the Capone syndicate, but from a series of dusty, forgotten notebooks discovered during a raid on a small-time Cicero gambling den called The Ship. The notebooks belong to a bookie named Lou Shumway. For 3 years, Shumway has been meticulously recording every cash transaction, every payout, every weekly profit. Wilson spends weeks poring over the tiny, cramped entries, cross-referencing names and dates. Hidden within the columns of numbers, he finds what he is looking for: coded entries that, when deciphered, reveal net profit distributions to a figure referred to only as Al. The trail is faint, but it is the first tangible link between the vast illegal cash flow and Capone himself. Wilson knows that to make a case, he needs more than just a bookie's records. He needs a witness who can connect the dots in a courtroom. He tracks Shumway to Florida, where the bookie is hiding in terror. Wilson's agents bring him in, and through a combination of threats of a long prison sentence and promises of federal protection, they convince him to talk. Shumway agrees to testify that the Al in his ledgers is, in fact, Alphonse Capone. The government now has its first insider. The next critical piece of evidence comes from the most public aspect of Capone's life: his spending. Wilson's team of forensic accountants begins to build a case based not on the money Capone earned, but on the money he spent. They subpoena records from tailors who made his silk suits, jewelers who sold him his diamond rings, and mechanics who serviced his armored Cadillac. They build an irrefutable portrait of a man living a life of extravagant luxury, with expenditures far exceeding any legal source of income. They track down a cashier from a Chicago bank who can testify to cashing a $50,000 check for Capone, a check drawn from the account of one of his horse tracks. The cashier's testimony will directly link Capone to the profits of a specific illegal enterprise. You are now in the grand jury room in the spring of 1931. The air is thick with anticipation. One by one, Wilson's witnesses are brought forward. Shumway, pale and nervous, details the cash flow from the gambling parlors. A former Capone bookkeeper, Fred Reese, is located and subpoenaed. Terrified for his life, Reese confirms the authenticity of ledgers that show Capone receiving profits of over $100,000 from just one of a dozen such establishments. The case is building, brick by painstaking brick. Wilson's strategy is brilliant. He will not try to prove Capone is a murderer or a bootlegger. He will prove he is a businessman who failed to pay his taxes. On June 5, 1931, the federal grand jury hands down its indictment. It is not for murder, conspiracy, or violation of the Volstead Act. It is for 22 counts of federal income tax evasion. The government alleges that between 1924 and 1929, Capone earned over $1 million on which he paid no taxes. Capone, ensconced in his Lexington hotel suite, laughs it off. He sees it as a nuisance charge, a legal technicality he can easily beat. His lawyers, confident and well paid, assure him they have a deal with the U.S. Attorney, George E. Q. Johnson. Capone will plead guilty, serve a short, comfortable sentence of perhaps 2.5 years in a minimum security facility, and then return to his empire. It is a cost of doing business. October 6, 1931. The trial begins in the federal courthouse in Chicago. Capone strolls into the courtroom, smiling and waving to reporters, dressed in a mustard yellow suit. He is confident, almost arrogant. He expects Judge James H. Wilkerson to rubber stamp the plea agreement his lawyers have arranged. But Judge Wilkerson is an old-school jurist, immune to the political pressures of Chicago. He looks down from the bench and announces to a stunned courtroom that he is not bound by any deals. It is time for somebody to impress upon the defendant that it is a crime to violate the income tax law, he states, his voice ringing with authority. He rejects the plea bargain. Capone will face a jury. The smile vanishes from his face. For the first time, Alphonse Capone, the man who controlled a city with fear and money, realizes he is trapped in a fight he cannot bribe, intimidate, or shoot his way out of. The moment Judge Wilkerson throws out the plea deal, a wave of panic washes over Capone's legal team. Their entire strategy has collapsed. The trial they thought would be a formality is now a fight for Capone's freedom. Capone, sitting at the defendant's table, his face a mask of stone-cold fury, leans over to his lawyer, Michael Ahern, and hisses, "Fix this. The order is clear. If the law will not bend, the jury must be broken." Frank Nitti, Capone's chief enforcer, immediately puts the outfit's formidable machinery of corruption into motion. His men fan out across Chicago, digging into the backgrounds of the 12 men on the jury. Bribes are offered, threats are made. Nitti's agents compile a list of jurors who are willing to be persuaded, and a source inside the bailiff's office assures him that the fix is in. But Frank Wilson and U.S. Attorney George E. Q. Johnson are not naive. They know exactly how Capone operates. They have anticipated this move. On the morning the trial is set to begin, as the selected jurors file into the jury box, Judge Wilkerson makes a stunning announcement. He has been informed of attempts to tamper with his jury. Therefore, at the last possible moment, he is invoking a rarely used judicial power. He orders the bailiff to swap his entire jury panel with the panel from an adjacent courtroom where a different federal trial is about to begin. The new jurors, who have no connection to the Capone case and have not been vetted or approached by the mob, are immediately sequestered. Capone watches, his jaw clenched, as the 12 men he believed he owned are led out and replaced by 12 complete strangers. Ahern and his co-counsel are aghast. They have prepared their case for a jury of city dwellers, men they believed would be sympathetic to a purveyor of illegal alcohol. The new jury is composed largely of men from rural areas outside Chicago, men with a different moral compass, men who are far less likely to be impressed by Capone's claims of being a public benefactor. The government's case begins. For 11 days, Johnson and his prosecutors present Wilson's mountain of evidence. They put the bookies, clerks, and cashiers on the stand. They present charts showing Capone's lavish spending, thousands on furniture, $7,000 on suits, $20,000 on a diamond belt buckle for his wife. They paint a clear, undeniable picture of a man drowning in cash, with no legal source to explain it. Capone's defense is weak, almost pathetic. His lawyers argue that the government has failed to prove their client earned a single dollar. They portray him as a misunderstood philanthropist, a victim of government persecution. Capone himself does not take the stand. He sits silently, his confidence visibly eroding with each passing day. He fidgets with his diamond ring, his eyes darting between the jurors and the judge, searching for a sign of weakness, a crack in the system he can exploit. He finds none. On the evening of October 17, 1931, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury returns. The courtroom is silent, packed with reporters and spectators. Capone stands, his face pale. The jury foreman hands the verdict to the clerk. He reads the findings aloud, count by count. On the early years, the jury acquits, citing insufficient evidence. But on the critical later counts, the ones built on Wilson's strongest evidence, the verdict is repeated 5 times. Guilty. A week later, on October 24th, Capone stands before Judge Wilkerson for sentencing. The judge delivers a blistering lecture on the arrogance and lawlessness that has plagued the city. He then hands down the sentence. 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence for tax evasion ever given. He also imposes $50,000 in fines and orders Capone to pay over $30,000 in court costs. Capone is led from the courtroom in a daze. His reign over Chicago finished. He is sent first to the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta. But even there, his influence persists. He bribes guards and lives a life of relative comfort. Furious, the federal government makes a final move. In August of 1934, he is transferred to a new inescapable federal prison rising from the cold waters of San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz. There, he is no longer the Emperor of Chicago. He is simply prisoner number 85, stripped of his name, his power, and his empire, left to succumb to the ravages of untreated syphilis that slowly destroys his mind. The man who bought a city was finally brought down, not by a bullet, but by an accountant's ledger.